The crimson droplets floating in zero gravity told a story that no human should have witnessed. Commander Kalen Voss pressed his palm against the viewport of the drifting merchant vessel Concordia, watching alien ichor spiral lazily through the ship's corridors like deadly confetti. 3 hours ago, this had been a routine supply run to the outer colonies. Now it was a tomb. The Veltharan boarding party hadn't expected resistance. Their 8-foot frames, encased in biomechanical exoskeletons that pulsed with bioluminescent, veins had torn through the ship's hull like paper. Their tri-jointed limbs moved with predatory grace, and their compound eyes, each the size of a human fist, had tracked every movement with calculated precision. They were apex predators from a world where mercy was evolutionary suicide. But they had made one critical error. They had assumed humans would behave like every other species they'd encountered in their 1,000-year conquest across the galaxy. Voss had been in the cargo bay when the first Veltharan warrior materialized through their phase shift technology. The creature's mandibles had clicked in what passed for laughter among its kind as it raised its plasma rifle. The translation implant in Voss's skull had converted its words into cold mechanical English. Your species will make adequate livestock. Submit, and your death will be swift. That was when Voss had smiled. The improvised explosive device, constructed from mining charges and jury-rigged to the ship's power core, had detonated with the fury of a dying star. The blast hadn't just killed the boarding party, it had vaporized them down to their constituent atoms. The Concordia had been gutted, her crew dead, but the Veltharan assault cruiser hanging in space beside her was now listing heavily, its hull breached in 17 places. Through his communicator, Voss could hear similar reports flooding in from across human space. The Veltharan hegemony had launched what they called the Great Harvesting, a simultaneous strike against every human colony, expecting the same swift capitulation they'd received from the Zeftari aquatic worlds, the crystalline Kormeth, Empire, and dozens of other civilizations. They hadn't counted on humanity's gift for creative destruction. Captain Nerida Stormwind's voice crackled through the static. Kepler Station reporting. We've lost the outer ring, but we took 43 of their ships with us. The Veltharan commander is requesting negotiation. Her laugh was sharp as broken glass. I told him humans don't negotiate with harvesters. Similar reports cascaded, in from across the colonies. The agricultural world of Demeter's Grace had turned their atmospheric processors into weapons, flooding the skies with toxic compounds that dissolved Veltharan carapaces. The mining colony on Hephaestus Prime had collapsed their entire operation, burying 3,000 invaders under a mountain of molten ore. Even the peaceful research station at Athena's Rest had weaponized their particle accelerator, turning it into a system-wide death ray. But it was Admiral Lycander Grimm's message that made Voss's blood sing with anticipation. All units, this is Fleet Command. Operation Righteous Fury is now active. We are not retreating. We are not surrendering. We are going to make these Xeno bastards remember why humanity clawed its way to the top of the food chain on a death world called Earth. The Veltharan had expected sheep. Instead, they had awakened wolves. Admiral Lycander Grimm stood in the war room of Indomitable, humanity's newest dreadnought, watching tactical displays that painted the galaxy in shades of violence. Red icons marked Veltharan fleets, blue represented human forces, but it was the growing number of purple markers, contested, zones where both sides bled, that told the real story. Sir, we've lost contact with the Titan shipyards, reported Commander Sable Nightingale, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. But before they went dark, they transmitted something interesting. The Veltharan are regrouping. They're calling this a pacification error and requesting reinforcements from the core worlds. Grimm's weathered face split into a predatory grin. 40 years of fighting pirates, rebels, and the occasional rogue AI had taught him to read between the lines. "They're scared. Good. How many ships can we mobilize?" "Every hull that can mount a weapon," Nightingale replied. "The civilian merchant marine is volunteering en masse. They're welding plasma cutters to their cargo haulers and calling them warships." Through the tactical display, Grimm watched the first phase of humanity's counterattack unfold. The Veltharan had superior technology, better armor, and weapons that could crack moons. But they fought with the methodical precision of a species that had never faced true desperation. Their tactics were elegant, efficient, and completely unprepared for human ingenuity born from spite. On the mining world of Vulcan's Forge, Foreman Bellum Ironheart had turned his entire operation into a kinetic bombardment system. Asteroid mining. Equipment became mass drivers, launching chunks of iron and nickel at significant fractions of light speed. The Veltharan fleet blockading the planet had been expecting a siege. Instead, they were being pelted with relativistic projectiles that turned their shields into light shows before punching through their hulls. The agricultural colonies had proved even more creative. Dr. Fauna Greenleaf, the terraforming specialist, on Eden's Promise, had released a bioengineered plague that targeted the silicon-based components in Veltharan technology. Their ships were literally rotting in space, biomechanical systems failing as the plague consumed their living circuits. But it was the report from Earth itself that made Grimm's chest swell with pride. The Sol Defense Fleet, outnumbered 10-1, had held the line for 16 straight hours. When their ammunition ran low, they had begun ramming attacks. When their ships were crippled, crews had donned EVA suits and boarded enemy vessels with nothing but plasma torches and fury. Commander Raven Steelclaw, leading the desperate defense of Luna Station, had transmitted a message that was already becoming legend. "Tell the Xenos that humans don't know how to retreat. We only know how to attack in a different direction." The Veltharan response had been swift and brutal. Their fleets began targeting civilian populations, hoping to break human morale through terror. They glassed 3 agricultural colonies, turning their surfaces into radioactive wastelands. They destroyed hospital ships and refugee convoys. They had gravely miscalculated human psychology. "Sir," Nightingale's voice cut through Grimm's thoughts, "we're receiving reports from across the frontier. The civilian massacres have triggered something. Our recruitment numbers just increased by 3,000%. Every human with a ship is heading for the front lines." Grimm nodded grimly. The Veltharan had just made the classic mistake of every would-be conqueror throughout history. They had given humanity a reason to stop fighting for territory and start fighting for survival. The difference was subtle but profound. A human fighting for land might retreat. A human fighting for the right to exist would burn down the universe before surrendering. "Nightingale, get me a fleet-wide channel," Grimm ordered. "It's time to remind the galaxy why Earth is called a death world." The battle for the Proxima Centauri system had been raging for 72 hours when Captain Vex Stormbringer finally understood what made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. She stood on the bridge of the heavy cruiser. Retribution, watching through the viewport as a damaged human frigate, the Defiant, made its final run at a Veltharan battlecruiser. The frigate was dying. Its hull was breached in a dozen places, atmosphere bleeding into space like luminous tears. Its weapons were offline. Its shields had failed hours ago. By every measure of military logic, Captain Torrin Voidwalker should have ordered an evacuation. Instead, he was accelerating toward the enemy vessel at maximum burn. "All ships, this is Defiant," Voidwalker's voice crackled through the comm channels, steady despite the obvious strain. "We are making our final approach. When we impact, we will breach their forward shield array. Follow us through the gap." Stormbringer watched the frigate's final moments with something approaching reverence. The Veltharan battlecruiser's point defense systems lit up space with deadly precision, but Defiant kept coming. When the ship finally struck, the explosion was visible from 3 astronomical units away. The enemy vessel's shields collapsed like a house of cards. "All units advance," Stormbringer ordered. "Make their sacrifice count." The human fleet surged forward through the gap, and for the first time in the battle, the Veltharan line began to buckle. But this was just one small victory in a war that spanned the galaxy. The reports flooding in painted a picture of absolute chaos. Humanity was fighting on 1,000 fronts simultaneously, and they were winning through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat. On the fortress world of Sparta's Stand, General Kara Ironwill had held her position for 6 days against overwhelming odds. When the Veltharan ground forces finally breached her defenses, they found that every human soldier had wired themselves with explosives. The resulting blast had taken out an entire Veltharan regiment and left a crater visible from orbit. The merchant marine had transformed overnight into the deadliest privateer fleet in galactic history. Captain Dex Stormhawk, commanding the converted cargo hauler free trader, had developed a tactic of filling his holds with nuclear waste and ramming Veltharan ships. The radiation didn't affect his heavily shielded crew, but it was lethal to the Veltharan's organic components. Even the scientific community had joined the war effort. Dr. Phoenix Mindforge, the xenobiologist from Kepler Station, had developed a sonic weapon that exploited the Veltharan's compound eyes. The frequency caused their optical nerves to vibrate until they hemorrhaged. It was scientifically elegant and utterly brutal. But perhaps the most disturbing reports came from the Psychological Warfare Division. Commander Jade Nightstalker had been broadcasting recordings of human music, specifically human war songs, on all Veltharan frequencies. The alien species, accustomed to the harmonious surrender songs of their previous conquests, were experiencing what their own psychologists described as ontological terror upon hearing humanity's celebration of violence. Stormbringer received a priority transmission from Admiral Grimm. His image appeared on her tactical display, and she could see the weight of command in his eyes. "Captain, we've intercepted Veltharan communications. They're requesting a meeting with our leadership. They want to discuss terms." "Terms?" Stormbringer couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "They started this war. They hunted us like animals." "I know," Grimm replied. "But here's the interesting part. They're not requesting our surrender. They're requesting theirs." The words hung in the space between them like a physical weight. After a moment, Stormbringer found her voice. "What did you tell them?" Grimm's smile was cold as space itself. "I told them that humanity accepts only one kind of surrender. Complete and unconditional. They will withdraw from every system they've occupied, pay reparations for the colonies they've destroyed, and provide us with complete intelligence about every other hostile species in the galaxy. And if they refuse, then we introduce them to a human concept they've never encountered before. Total war. No quarter given, no prisoners taken. We hunt them to extinction across every star system they've ever called home." Stormbringer nodded slowly. The Veltharan had made the classic mistake of assuming that humanity's peaceful expansion into space meant they were pacifists. They had confused restraint with weakness. Now they were learning the difference between a species that chose peace and one that was incapable of war. "There's something else," Grimm continued. "Intelligence reports suggest that other species are watching this conflict. The entire galaxy is holding its breath, waiting to see if humanity can do what no other species has done in 1,000 years, which is make the Veltharan bleed." The Veltharan High Command had convened for the first time in 3 centuries, their massive forms gathered in the crystalline chambers of their home world, Velthara Prime. Supreme Overlord Zixthak, whose carapace bore the scars of a dozen conquered worlds, stared at the tactical displays with something his species had rarely experienced: uncertainty. "Explain to me," his voice resonated through the chamber like grinding stone, "how a species that has existed in space for less than 2 centuries has destroyed 40% of our fleet." War Master Kelvaron shifted nervously, his compound, eyes reflecting the crimson battle reports that scrolled endlessly across the displays. They fight without logic, Overlord. When cornered, they do not surrender. They explode. When outnumbered, they do not retreat. They charge. When their ships are crippled, they use them as weapons. You speak of tactical errors, another voice interjected. Bioengineer Velmoth, whose modifications allowed her to interface directly with their living ships, gestured to a particularly disturbing report. This is not tactics. This is madness. They have turned their own bodies into weapons. They have weaponized their dead. They have made their children into soldiers. The reports continued to cascade through the chamber. On the industrial world of Prometheus Station, Chief Engineer Zara Flameheart had turned the entire planet's manufacturing capacity into a single massive weapon. Fusion reactors had been overloaded in sequence, creating a chain reaction that turned the planet's core into a stellar-class explosive. The resulting blast had destroyed a Veltharan fleet and left a new asteroid belt where a world had once stood. The human commander had transmitted a single message before the detonation. From the ashes of Prometheus, we give you fire. But it was the psychological reports that truly disturbed the Veltharan leadership. Their species had evolved on a world where survival meant careful calculation and measured response. Every other species they had encountered had fought logically, surrendering when defeat was mathematically certain. Humans defied mathematical certainty. They sing while they die, reported Psi-Analyst Hex Corin, her neural implants flickering with incomprehension. Their soldiers broadcast music during combat. They name their weapons. They speak to their ships as if they were alive. They perform rituals before battle that serve no tactical purpose, but seem to increase their effectiveness exponentially. Supreme Overlord Zixthak accessed the latest reports from the front lines. On the frontier world of Achilles' Rest, Captain Blaze Stormborn had held off an entire Veltharan division with nothing but a squad of engineers and a mining laser. When asked to surrender, his response had been broadcast across the system. "Come and take it." The siege had lasted 37 days. When Veltharan forces finally breached the facility, they found it empty except for a single explosive device and a message carved into the wall. "Humans don't retreat. We advance in different directions." "There is more," Kelvaron continued, his voice dropping to what passed for a whisper among his kind. "Our intelligence suggests that this species has not yet deployed their full military capacity. What we have been fighting is primarily their civilian population." The chamber fell silent. The concept was almost incomprehensible to the Veltharan mindset. In their society, as in most galactic civilizations, there was a clear distinction between military and civilian populations. Warriors fought, civilians submitted. "You are suggesting," Zixthak said slowly, "that their actual military forces have yet to engage?" "That is correct, Overlord. Admiral Grimm has been coordinating the defense using primarily converted civilian vessels and volunteer crews. Their actual navy has been conducting what they call strategic preparation." "What kind of preparation?" The answer came in the form of a priority alert that flooded the chamber with crimson light. A massive human fleet had just translated into Veltharan space, and their transponder signals identified them as the Sol Defense Fleet, humanity's actual military. Admiral Grimm's image appeared on the main display, his expression calm, but his eyes holding depths of calculated violence that made even the Veltharan leadership uncomfortable. "Supreme Overlord Zixthak," he said, his voice carrying easily through the translation matrix. "I believe you wanted to discuss terms." "We are prepared to negotiate a cessation of hostilities," Zixthak replied, his own composure impressive, given the circumstances. Grimm's smile was arctic. "I'm afraid you misunderstand the situation. You are not negotiating with equals. You are receiving the terms of your surrender. You have 72 hours to begin complete withdrawal from human space. Any Veltharan vessel found in our territory after that deadline will be destroyed without warning. And if we refuse, then you will discover why every other species in the galaxy considers humanity's home planet a death world. We will not merely defeat you, we will make you extinct. The connection terminated, leaving the Veltharan leadership in stunned silence. For the first time in their species' history, they were the ones being hunted. The war had turned, and the galaxy was witnessing something unprecedented, the Veltharan hegemony in full retreat. Admiral Grimm stood in the command center of Indomitable, now leading the largest human fleet ever assembled, as reports flooded in from across their territory. Veltharan forces have abandoned the Rigel system, reported Captain Nebula Starforge, her voice carrying barely contained excitement. They left behind their supply depot intact. Our engineers estimate they departed so quickly they forgot to activate their scuttling charges. It was a pattern repeating across human space. The methodical, calculating Veltharan had never experienced. The psychological pressure of fighting an enemy that refused to behave logically. Their retreat was becoming a rout, and humanity was pressing their advantage with characteristic ruthlessness. Commander Orion Nighthawk, leading the pursuit fleet, transmitted from the edge of the Vega system. Admiral, we've cornered a Veltharan. Squadron attempting to retreat through the outer planets. They're requesting safe passage to neutral space. Denied, Grimm responded without hesitation. They wanted to harvest us like livestock. They can face the consequences of their choices. The battle for the Vega system lasted 18 hours. When it ended, 3 Veltharan heavy cruisers had been reduced to expanding clouds of superheated plasma, and the survivors were being processed through humanity's newly established prisoner-of-war camps. The conditions were harsh but fair, a concept that confused the Veltharan, who had expected either execution or enslavement. Dr. Luna Mindweaver, the xenopsychologist assigned to interrogate prisoners, had discovered something fascinating about their former enemies. Admiral, the Veltharan don't understand mercy. In their culture, defeat means extinction. They literally cannot comprehend why we're keeping them alive. What did you tell them? That humans are complicated. We can be extraordinarily violent and unexpectedly compassionate, sometimes simultaneously. I think it's driving them insane. The psychological warfare was proving as effective as the physical combat. Humanity's refusal to fit into the Veltharan's understanding of galactic civilization was causing widespread confusion in their ranks. Desertions were being reported for the first time in their species' military history. But the true turning point came when Captain Astro Voidhunter, commanding the deep space reconnaissance vessel Seeker, transmitted a discovery that changed everything. Admiral, you need to see this. We've found their homeworld. Velthara Prime hung in space like a malevolent jewel, its crystalline cities glittering across the surface of a world that had never known war. Orbital defense platforms surrounded the planet in perfect geometric patterns, their weapons systems the most advanced in known space. It should have been impregnable. Grimm studied the tactical display, his mind already working through the implications. Analysis? Heavy defenses, but they're designed to repel conventional attacks, reported Chief Tactical Officer Vex Warhammer. They're not prepared for human-style asymmetric warfare. Recommendations. We don't attack the defenses. We ignore them completely. The plan that emerged over the following days was so audacious that it would have been dismissed as impossible by any other species. Instead of launching a conventional assault on Velthara Prime's defenses, humanity would bypass them entirely. The converted cargo hauler Persistence, commanded by Captain Flux Ironheart, approached the system broadcasting standard merchant signals. To the Veltharan sensors, it appeared to be nothing more than a lost cargo vessel. They permitted it to approach the planet to receive humanitarian aid. The Persistence was carrying humanity's newest weapon, a quantum virus designed by Dr. Sage Codebreaker, the xenobiology specialist who had defected from the Veltheran Science Division. The virus was specifically designed to target the organic components of Veltheran technology. When the persistence entered Velthera Prime's atmosphere and activated the virus, the effect was catastrophic. The planet's organic technology began, failing simultaneously. Defense platforms went offline. Communication networks collapsed. Transportation systems ceased functioning. Within hours, the most advanced world in Veltheran space had been reduced to pre-industrial conditions. Grimm's message to the Veltheran leadership was broadcast across the galaxy. You wanted to harvest humanity. Instead, you have taught us that we are very, very good at war. Your homeworld is defenseless. Your fleets are scattered. Your empire is collapsing. But we are not you. We do not exterminate defeated enemies. We give you one final chance. Complete. Surrender, or we will demonstrate why Earth is called a death world. The response came within hours. Supreme Overlord Zixthak's image appeared on displays across human space, his compound eyes reflecting what could only be described as defeat. We surrender, unconditionally. But humanity's war was not yet over. As news of the Veltheran defeat spread across the galaxy, something unexpected happened. Species that had been enslaved by the hegemony for centuries began to rebel. The galaxy's first successful resistance against the Veltheran had given them hope, and humanity, having discovered they were remarkably good at war, found themselves with a choice: return to peaceful expansion or help liberate a galaxy. The choice was never really in doubt. The Galactic Liberation Front had never existed before humanity's war with the Veltheran hegemony, but within 6 months of the hegemony's surrender, it had become the most powerful military alliance in known space. Admiral Grimm found himself commanding not just human forces, but a coalition of species that had been enslaved for centuries. The Zeftari aquatic worlds are reporting successful liberation of their home system, announced Commander Cosmos, Starleader, humanity's new liaison to the coalition forces. Their water-based guerrilla tactics, combined with human military advisors, have proven devastatingly effective against Veltheran occupation forces. The War Room of Indomitable had been expanded to accommodate representatives from 17 different species. The site would have been impossible to imagine just a year ago. Crystalline Cormeth engineers working alongside silicon-based Technari tacticians, their combined expertise guided by human strategic thinking. Captain Nova Flamestrike, recently, promoted to head of special operations, transmitted from the Epsilon Eridani system. Admiral, the Helvari have successfully retaken their manufacturing worlds. They're asking for human technical assistance to convert their industrial capacity to weapons production. Approved, Grimm responded. Send them engineering teams and our latest weapon designs. Make sure they understand that we're not just fighting. For liberation, we're fighting to ensure this never happens again. The transformation had been remarkable. Species that had been broken by centuries of Veltheran oppression were rediscovering their capacity for resistance. But it was humanity's influence that had changed everything. Human military advisors weren't just teaching tactics, they were teaching the fundamental concept of fighting for something greater than survival. Dr. Arya Stormwright, the xenoanthropologist studying the liberation movement, had coined a term for what was happening. Humanity syndrome? Species that had never known successful resistance were adopting human approaches to warfare, not just the tactics, but the psychology. They were learning to fight with hope instead of desperation. The Veltheran response had been predictably brutal. Supreme Overlord Zixthak, now operating from a heavily fortified command ship, had declared the liberation movement a threat to galactic stability. These humans have introduced chaos to our ordered galaxy, his broadcasts proclaimed. They must be eliminated before they corrupt the natural order further, but the natural order was already crumbling. On the industrial world of Ferrum Majoris, The enslaved Technari had used human-designed explosives to destroy the planet's entire mining operation, then used the debris to construct a massive orbital defense platform. The Veltharan fleet that arrived to restore order found themselves facing a fortress built from the remains of their own infrastructure. The battle that followed became known as the Forge of Freedom. Technari defensive positions, reinforced with human engineering expertise, held against waves of Veltharan assault troops. When the enemy finally broke through the outer defenses, they discovered that every Technari warrior had been equipped with human-designed weapons that could penetrate Veltharan armor. For the first time in their history, the Technari saw their oppressors bleed. "Admiral," reported Captain Zenith Voidcaller from the front lines, "the Technari are requesting permission to pursue the retreating Veltharan forces into their territory. They want to liberate the slave worlds." Grimm considered the request carefully. The liberation movement was growing beyond humanity's ability to control, and that was exactly what he had hoped for. "Permission granted. Remind them that we're not conquering territory, we're freeing people." But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. The Zeftari diplomat Aquamine approached Grimm directly, her translated words carrying weight that resonated through the command center. "Admiral, my people have a question. After the war, after the liberation, what then? We have never known freedom. We do not know how to be free." It was a question that struck at the heart of humanity's greatest challenge. They had proven remarkably adept at war, but the galaxy needed more than military victory. It needed a vision of what came next. Grimm's response would later be recorded as one of the defining moments of galactic history. "Freedom isn't something you know how to do. It's something you learn by doing. We'll figure it out together." The message resonated across the galaxy. Species that had spent centuries as slaves began to imagine a future where they could determine their own destiny. The Veltharan hegemony, built on the certainty that order must be imposed from above, began to face the most dangerous enemy they had ever encountered: hope. As reports continued to flood in from across the galaxy, Grimm realized that humanity had done more than win a war. They had started a revolution. The galaxy would never be the same. And in the deepest reaches of space, ancient civilizations that had hidden from the Veltharan for millennia began to emerge from the shadows, drawn by reports of a species that had accomplished the impossible. They had made tyrants afraid. 5 years after the first Veltharan harvesting ship had attempted to turn humanity into livestock, Admiral Grimm stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, watching as the galaxy's first freely elected Galactic Council convened in the vast chamber below. Representatives from 47 species, many of whom had never known self-governance, were attempting to forge a new order based on principles that humanity had introduced to the stars. "The vote is unanimous," announced Counselor Prism Lightweaver, the Cormeth representative, whose crystalline form caught and reflected the chamber's illumination into rainbow patterns. "The Galactic Declaration of Sentient Rights is hereby adopted. No species shall be enslaved, harvested, or exterminated by another. All sentient beings possess the inherent right to determine their own destiny." Through the vast, transparasteel windows, Grimm could see the remains of the Veltharan hegemony's former capital ships being converted into hospital vessels and research stations. The transformation was both symbolic and practical, instruments of oppression becoming tools of healing and knowledge. Commander Stellar Nightforge approached, her expression mixing satisfaction with concern. "Admiral, we've received the final report from the War Crimes Tribunal. Supreme Overlord Zixthak and his command staff have been sentenced to life imprisonment, not execution. The Council felt that taking their lives would make us no better than them." Grimm nodded slowly. It was a very human distinction, the difference between justice and revenge, and one that many species had struggled to understand. The Veltharan had expected either death or continued enslavement after their defeat. Instead, they found themselves imprisoned but alive, forced to witness the galaxy they had tried to control flourishing without their imposed order. "What about the rehabilitation programs?" Grimm asked. "More successful than anyone predicted. Dr. Lyra Mindbridge reports that younger Veltheran are actually adapting to cooperative behavior. Apparently, their aggressive tendencies were largely cultural, not genetic." Who would have thought? The irony was profound. The Veltheran had justified their conquests by claiming that other species were inherently inferior and needed guidance. Now they were discovering that their own nature wasn't fixed, that they too could change and grow. Captain Eclipse Stormrider's voice crackled through the communication system. "Admiral, we've received confirmation from the Outer Rim. The last of the slave worlds have been liberated. The Helvari have successfully established their own government, and they're requesting to join the Galactic Council. It was the end of an era and the beginning of another. The galaxy that had once cowered under Veltheran rule was now a constellation of free civilizations, each contributing their unique strengths to a collective future. The aquatic Zeftari had become master terraformers, turning dead worlds into oceanic paradises. The crystalline core meth had revolutionized communications technology, creating instantaneous translation networks that allowed species to truly understand each other for the first time. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation had occurred in humanity itself. The species that had once been content with slow, peaceful expansion had discovered their capacity for both war and leadership. Human military advisors were spread throughout the galaxy, not as conquerors but as teachers, sharing the knowledge of how to fight for freedom. "There's one more thing," Nightforge said, her voice carrying a note of anticipation. "The deep space exploration fleets have made contact with civilizations beyond the former hegemony. Some of them have been hiding from the Veltheran for thousands of years. They want to meet the species that ended the hegemony's reign." Grimm smiled, remembering the words of Captain Voss from that first desperate battle aboard the Concordia. The Veltheran had expected sheep. Instead, they had awakened wolves. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity was more than wolves. They were shepherds, protectors of the flock they had helped to free. Through the observation window, he watched as a formation of ships from a dozen different species performed a ceremonial flyby of Unity Station. At the center of the formation flew a human vessel, not as a symbol of dominance, but as a reminder of what was possible when someone decided to stand up and fight. A say. Final message came from an unexpected source. In the depths of Velthara Prime's ruins, archaeologists had discovered ancient records that predated the hegemony. The Veltheran themselves had once been enslaved by an even older empire, one that had fallen to its own tyranny millennia ago. The cycle of oppression was older than anyone had imagined, stretching back through galactic history like a virus that infected civilization after civilization. But humanity had broken the cycle. They had proven that tyranny was not inevitable, that species could choose cooperation over conquest, freedom over control. The galaxy that emerged from the ashes of the hegemony was something new, a civilization based not on the rule of the strong over the weak, but on the radical idea that all sentient beings had value. As the Galactic Council session continued below, representatives from species that had never before had a voice in their own governance debated the future of their shared civilization. It was messy, complicated, and occasionally chaotic, everything that the Veltharans' imposed order had tried to eliminate. It was, in other words, gloriously, imperfectly free. Admiral Grimm turned from the observation window and walked toward the exit. Humanity's war was over, but their work was just beginning. Somewhere in the vast expanse of space, other empires might be watching, other tyrants might be planning their own campaigns of conquest. They would find a galaxy that remembered how to fight back, led by a species that had never learned how to bow. The stars themselves seemed to burn brighter, as if the universe itself approved of what had been accomplished. Humanity had entered the galaxy as explorers and farmers, miners, and scientists. They had become something more, the guardians of freedom itself, the species that had taught the galaxy to stand up and fight for what was right. And in the depths of space, new worlds were being born under the light of free stars, worlds where children of a dozen species would grow up never knowing the fear of harvest ships, never having to wonder if today would be the day their freedom ended. The galaxy had learned to roar.